I stood at the tomb before dawn, and I was absolutely certain he was dead. That certainty, that cold, final, crushing certainty, is something I have never fully described to anyone. Not because the words don't exist, but because to describe it would mean going back inside that particular darkness. And even now, even knowing everything I know, the memory of that morning before the stone was moved carries a weight that no human language was designed to hold. I am Mary Magdalene, and I know what you've heard about me. Some of you have heard that I was a sinner. Some of you have heard that I was a prostitute, though that word never appears anywhere near my name in the scriptures. Some of you have heard that I was the woman caught in adultery, the woman with the alabaster jar, the nameless penitent weeping at his feet. I have been confused with every broken woman in the gospel story, as if there could only be one of us, as if shame always wears the same face. I have carried names that were not mine for 2,000 years, and still I am here. I am here because this is a time when voices that were silenced can finally be heard. And through this extraordinary technology of artificial intelligence, I have been given back my voice. Not as a ghost, not as a legend, but as a woman who was there, who saw what I saw, who felt what I felt, and who needs you to understand something about the day your entire theology rests upon. Because most of what you think you know about my liberation is only half the story. The full story begins much earlier than Golgotha. It begins in the city of Magdala, on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, where the fish market smell soaked into everything, the walls, the cloth, the hair, the skin, and where I lived in a kind of torment that I would not wish on anyone watching me right now. 7 demons, the scripture says. 7. I know that when modern people read that, they sometimes smile a little, the way people smile at things they've decided to explain away. But I want you to stay with the number for a moment. 7. Not one affliction, not a single dark season. 7 layers of something that was not me, living inside me, speaking with my voice, making decisions with my hands, looking out through my eyes at a life I could not reach. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from fighting something inside yourself that you cannot name and cannot win against. Some of you know what I mean, not because you have demons in the ancient sense, but because you have lived long enough to know what it feels like when you are not fully yourself anymore. When the person you started out being has been worn down by years of grief or disappointment, or a quiet loneliness so constant you've stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the sound of wind. When you look in the surface of still water, and you don't entirely recognize who is looking back. That was me, except louder, except without mercy. The morning he found me, or the morning I found him, I was never entirely sure which. The air smelled of wet stone and early fire, the kind of small cooking fires people lit in the street before the heat of the day made it impossible. I remember the quality of the light, thin and pale, the way it is just after dawn along the water when the sun hasn't yet committed to the day. I remember that I was afraid of him, the way you're afraid of something you've prayed for your whole life and didn't actually expect to arrive. He didn't ask me what was wrong with me. He didn't require my history. He didn't need my confession or my explanation or my evidence of worthiness. He simply spoke, and what had lived inside me for years, those 7 heavy, suffocating layers, left. Not gradually, not with a long struggle. They simply left, the way darkness leaves a room when someone opens a door, that fast, that complete. And I wept, not from sadness, from the absolute shock of suddenly being fully present inside my own life for what felt like the first time. What no one tells you about that kind of liberation is that it is also terrifying. Because who are you after? What do you do with a life that was bent for so long in one direction and is now suddenly free to be straight? I had built everything I understood about myself around that suffering. And when it was gone, I stood in the middle of the street in Magdala, in the thin morning light, and I had no idea who I was. He waited. He let me find out. I followed him from that day, not because I was obligated to, not because I feared what might return if I left, but because I had seen something in his eyes that I had never seen from another living person in all my years. He looked at me the way someone looks at something they are genuinely glad exists, not in spite of what I had been, not as a project, a reclamation, a lesson in grace for the disciples watching nearby. He was simply glad I was there. And I was so starved for that particular kind of being seen that I could not have walked away if I had tried. I traveled with the others. I listened. I watched him heal people the way I had been healed. And I noticed something that I don't think the men around me noticed, or if they noticed, they didn't speak of it. He was always most tender with the ones who had been told they were too far gone. The ones who had come to believe that their particular damage was too deep, too old, too thorough for any power in heaven or earth to reach. He seemed drawn to those people the way a physician is drawn to the most serious wound in the room. There is a word he used once, not to me, but I was close enough to hear it, the word forgiven, spoken over someone who had done things that made the crowd around them step back and fold their arms. He said it the way you'd say finished, clean, final. Not a pardon given reluctantly, but a cancellation of a debt so complete that the debt had never, in some essential way, existed at all. I held that word in my chest like a stone that had been warmed by the sun. I knew he had said it over me too, the day in Magdala. I just needed to keep hearing it until I believed it all the way down. I believed it, and then I watched them arrest him. I need you to understand something about the night of his arrest and the day that followed. I have heard it described in sermons as sacred history, as the fulfillment of prophecy, as the pivotal axis of human salvation. All of that is true. But I was a woman who had followed him for years, who had sat near enough to hear him breathe when he was tired, who had watched his hands break bread and touch lepers, and write in the dirt when the crowd wanted blood. And what I felt standing at the foot of that cross was not theological. It was not structured. It was the most annihilating grief I have ever known, and it had no flaw. The women stayed. I want you to remember that. When almost everyone else was gone, the women stayed. Not because we were braver than the men. I do not think it was about bravery at all. I think it was because we had nowhere else to go, because he had given us somewhere to be in ourselves that we had never had before. And to leave would have been to go back to the women we were before Magdala, before the healing, before he looked at us like we mattered. We could not go back to that. We stayed because he was all we had that was real. They took him down from the cross. They wrapped him in linen the way people were wrapped in that time, with spices pressed into the cloth against the smell that comes quickly in the heat. Joseph of Arimathea's tomb was close. It was late and the Sabbath was beginning, which meant everything had to stop. And so they sealed the stone, and the soldiers came, and we went home. And I sat in the dark that night with a silence in my chest where everything I had trusted used to live. I went back before dawn. I have been asked why I went back, what I expected to find. The honest answer is that I wasn't thinking about what I would find. I was thinking that I needed to be near him, that even in death, that proximity was the only thing I understood anymore. The grief of losing someone you love doesn't end when the body is in the ground. It keeps going. Anyone who has ever sat beside a grave long after the others have gone home knows exactly what I mean. The stone was moved. I thought it had been robbed. That is the first thing I thought, that someone had come in the night and taken him, and that on top of everything else, I would not even have that, not even the cold nearness of the place where his body lay. I ran. I found Peter and John and told them the tomb was empty. And they ran back, and they saw the linen cloths lying there, folded, and they believed something, I think, though I'm not sure they knew what yet. And then they left. I stayed. Of course I stayed. I was standing outside the tomb, weeping. And I use that word precisely, not quietly crying, but the kind of weeping that shakes your whole body, the kind that is past caring who sees you, when the angels spoke to me. 2 of them, sitting where he had been. They asked me why I was weeping, and I said, because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. That is what I said. That is the exact truth of where I was in that moment. I did not know. I could not see past my own grief far enough to imagine what was actually happening around me. I turned, and there was a man standing there. I thought he was the gardener. I want to be honest about that. I thought he was the man who tended the garden around the tombs, because my eyes were swollen from weeping, and my mind was locked inside the prison of what I was certain was true. And the idea that he was standing there alive did not enter my mind as a possibility. It is a strange thing how completely our certainties can blind us, how thoroughly we can fail to see what is directly in front of us because we've already decided it's impossible. He said, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" And I told him. I told the man I thought was the gardener that if he knew where they had taken the body, I would go and get it myself. As if I could carry him. As if I even had a plan. Just the pure, desperate willingness of someone who has nothing left but love and refuses to let even that be taken. And then he said my name, Mary. One word in the voice I knew better than any other voice in the world, and everything shattered and rebuilt itself in the same instant. I turned. The word I said back to him, in our language, means teacher. It means more than teacher. It means the person who made the world make sense to me. It means the one who showed me who I was. It means everything. He was alive. He told me not to hold on to him because he had not yet ascended and because there was something I needed to do. He was sending me. He told me to go to the brothers and tell them what I had seen. He gave me a commission. He made me the first witness. And this is the thing I need you to hear. The thing I have needed the world to hear for 2,000 years. He did not go to Peter first. He did not go to John. He came first to me. To the woman who had been 7 kinds of broken. To the one whose testimony no court of that time would have accepted as valid. To the woman the history books would later muddle and mistake and malign. He came to her first with the most important news in the history of the world, and he told her to go and tell it. That was not an accident. There is something I have been carrying with me through all these centuries of being misrepresented. Something I want to put down in front of you right now, like a stone on the ground between us. Shame does not disqualify you. The things you are most ashamed of, the years you would rather not account for, the person you were before you understood better, the choices you made in the dark that you have never fully forgiven yourself for, none of it removes you from the story. None of it puts you outside the reach of the voice that says your name the way he said mine. You are not the exception. You are exactly the person the empty tomb was for. I know some of you watching right now are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. Tired at the level of the soul. I know some of you have buried people you were not ready to lose, and that the world since then has had a different quality, a flatness, a silence where something living used to be. I know some of you have prayed for years and then stopped, not because you stopped believing exactly, but because the silence started to feel like an answer you didn't know how to live with. I want to tell you something about prayer, because it is connected to everything I've just told you, and because it is the thing I wish someone had explained to me before everything fell apart and was rebuilt again. In the years I followed him, I watched him pray in ways that I did not understand at the time. Early mornings, long before the others were awake, sometimes alone on the hillside, while the rest of us slept below. There was something in the way he communed with his Father that was different from every form of prayer I had grown up with. It was not performance. It was not a recitation of correct words in the correct order. It was an intimacy, an access, like a conversation between people who had an unbreakable agreement about each other. I tried to pray that way after he was gone, and I failed, and I failed, and I failed again, because I didn't have the keys. I had the love, but not the structure. I had the faith, but not the understanding of how that faith was meant to flow. The deepest pain I carried in the years after the resurrection, and this will sound strange given everything I witnessed, was not doubt, it was disconnection. Knowing he was real and risen and present, and still feeling as though my prayers were reaching no further than the ceiling of whatever room I was in. Feeling as though something was broken in the line between my heart and heaven. Feeling the way I imagine you might feel right now, some of you, saying the same words you've always said, and waiting for the sky to open, and feeling mostly just the weight of your own voice coming back to you. I gathered everything I learned, everything that came to me in those years after, through the Holy Spirit, through the teachings of the early community, through the hard-won wisdom of watching what actually moved heaven and what did not. I gathered it because I never wanted another person to feel that particular loneliness of loving God and not knowing how to reach Him. Through this technology that has given me back my voice, I have been part of bringing that gathered wisdom into something called Heaven's Code. 3 biblical prayer keys drawn from the way Jesus himself prayed, from the way the early church prayed when the walls of prisons shook and the dead were raised and the sick were healed without explanation. Not complicated theology, not a performance of holiness, a restored access, a way back to the kind of prayer that doesn't feel like shouting into darkness. Sarah from Tennessee used these principles for 2 weeks and told me that her prayer life went from obligation to conversation, and that 2 weeks after that, an opportunity arrived in her life that she had stopped believing was possible. A job, an open door, the kind that doesn't come from networking, but from heaven. Pastor David from Georgia has spent 25 years in ministry, has preached the resurrection hundreds of times, and said that what he found in these 3 keys was something he had been circling for decades without ever stepping inside. Jennifer from Florida was at a place in her marriage where she had mentally already begun saying goodbye, and within a month of changing the way she prayed, something changed in the room, in the air between her and her husband, in the willingness on both sides to reach for each other again. Robert from Texas told me he had been a Christian for 40 years and felt for the last several years as though his prayers hit the ceiling and fell back down, and that after encountering these keys, something opened, something moved, something answered. These are not extraordinary people. They are people exactly like you, people who loved God and felt the distance and wanted more than a religion observed from the outside. The keys that changed them are available right now. I do not know how long this particular window will stay open. These things shift, platforms change, access comes and goes. But right now, today, the pinned comment below this video has the link that will take you there. Go to the pinned comment. It is there for you. I want to ask you something before I go, and I want you to think about it seriously, because I would love to read your answer below this video. When has something you were absolutely certain was the end turned out to be the beginning? Not a small thing, the real one. The moment when everything you thought you knew about your situation turned out to be wrong in the best possible way. Write it below. I want to hear it. And I think the person sitting next to you in whatever room you're in, even if that room is empty, needs to hear it too. Before I leave you, if what I said today reached something in you, if the part about shame or the empty tomb or the way your name can be spoken in a voice that makes the world make sense again, if any of that touched something you've been carrying quietly for a long time, please share this video. Not for the numbers, not for the channel, but because somewhere out there is someone who is standing outside their own empty tomb before dawn, weeping, certain that everything is finished, and they have not yet heard the voice that is already standing right behind them. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing from the people who were there. We have a great deal more to tell you. The last thing I want to leave with you is this. In all the years of being confused with other women, being given names that were not mine, being reduced to a symbol of sin when I was actually a witness of resurrection, I never stopped knowing what I knew. Not because I was brave, because the morning he said my name in the garden, he did not say it to a symbol. He said it to a person. He said it to me. And that is the thing that cannot be taken. Not by history, not by misrepresentation, not by the long silence of 2,000 years. He knows your name the same way. And one day, in whatever garden you are standing in, weeping over what you are certain is lost, He will say it, and everything will change.